Thank you very much for telling me that, computer. Get rid of that. There we go. Good evening. Welcome to our monthly meeting. I have got a few quick updates for everybody, and then we're going on to the main event. Behind the scenes, we've been having a bit of a wind turbine mitigation campaign, hidden away, quietly working on things, emails, letters, Zoom meetings, etc., etc. We are not saying there should be no wind turbines. We're just trying to get a few more things in place to try and reduce the amount of bird strikes, because they're putting an awful lot of them around the province, all in nice windy areas on headlands. Heard back from a whole 2 ministers from all the emails and letters we sent out, both of which were basically saying it met the environmental assessments and it's going ahead. We're not stopping. The environmental assessments, and certainly one of them was very, very flawed, but I have noticed the province recently actually starting a little bit of a campaign to educate the province about wind turbines and how they're coming, etc., etc. Whether that's in response to what's been happening between us and other organisations, I don't know. But anyway, so be aware. Bear hunt update. You're all probably very aware that there will be no spring bear hunt as was proposed for 2024 in Nova Scotia. The Bird Society did get quite involved with this initially on various media platforms. Unfortunately, the pro bear hunting lobby got very, very irate, is the best way of putting it. And there was an awful lot of not very pleasant messages and emails going to current and former members of the board. The Facebook and other media things were taken down after a few days, but we did keep on things behind the scenes with other conservation bodies, lobbying and talking to people about this. And as you're all aware, it was a very, very narrow decision, 51% to 47% to be no bear hunt in NS this spring. Whether it changes for the future, again, we don't know. But that was actually quite nice after the, put it bluntly, abuse we suffered, for that to come through and not go ahead. So that was some good news. And as always, I mean, we try and do things quietly and calmly behind the scenes, and it seems to work most of the time. Anyway, this weekend, as we mentioned, we've got the City Nature Challenge. HRM and CBRM are the ones taking part in that, and I'm naturalist in the area. So please go to the Facebook events section, click on the events, and you will see all the details linking across to the INAT site, etc. And let's just see if Halifax or CBRM can really get a big total for on INAT. Because the New Zealanders and Australians have already started and they're going like crazy over there, apparently. So that's a big event. Got some field trips to announce as well. May the 11th, 9 o'clock, Amherst Point Bird Sanctuary, being led by Sean Chapman. Always good up in Amherst Point, so it's worth going to. Please, again, check the events section. May the 18th, Cape Sable Island. That's the one attached with the causeway, with James Hurtle. Who the heck knows what's going to be found on CSI after the European Golden Plover last weekend. May the 19th, Bird in the Shearwater Trail up in Metro area on the Dartmouth side, being led by Marty Finch. So should be some interesting warblers, hopefully, on that.
There's been Canadian warblers.
Canada warbler and Tennessee in the past.
Yeah.
Yep, so you never know. And then 25th of May, Conkerall Mills, again being led by James Hurtle, who was Puffin of the Year last year. Heck, again, you never know what James is going to find. He knows that area pretty darn well. So again, check the events section on the Facebook page. And time to get to the main event. Tonight's talk, pelagic birding. What a great word. Being carried out by our good friend there, Jason. He's been actively birding since 2015. And heck, takes some amazing photographs of birds, wildlife, trees, the space, the eclipse, unbelievable, and really does enjoy his pelagic birding and does a lot of these events. So anyway, over to you, my man. Have fun, and I will have to click the share screen button when I can find it. Just there.
Excuse me, I'm just noticing there's a decent amount of people that don't have the mute button, and I'm getting interference from. Just make sure you have your mute button on.
Please mute. You able to share okay, Jason?
It says host disabled, screen sharing still.
As always, but old Tony's off.
Oh no, you've got to go up to make host.
Ah, so on the view.
Or try going over to Jason and say make host.
There you go, Jason. You should be able to share and do anything now.
Yep.
Fantastic.
All right. You see my screen okay?
Good.
Looks good.
Okay. So everybody, thanks for joining. I recognize most of you on the call, so may not be anything new for you, but hopefully it's still a little bit entertaining at least. So I put together a presentation at the request of Susan to talk about finding and identifying pelagic birds. So we'll start off with a nice fog bow scene out on the ocean where a lot of pelagic birding is done, and we'll get right into it. So hopefully I can get through this in enough time, and we can have some time for questions at the end. If there's anything pressing during the presentation, don't hesitate. But if we get too many questions, I'll have to cut it off to the end so I can try and get through my material. Okay, so for an agenda, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction, talk about what are pelagic birds, talk about where to find them. We'll talk about some tips for viewing and photographing pelagic birds, and we'll go through the different types and some of the identification traits for pelagic birds. So on the top, we've got a Corey's shearwater, and on the bottom, we've got an Atlantic puffin. Both of these taken just off Halifax towards Pearl Island. So, okay, so we'll do a bit of an introduction. Most of you know me, but I'm from Halifax, actually from Stillwater Lake, just on the west side of Halifax. I've been a keen birder and photographer since about 2015. As of February, I've birded 19 countries to date, and hoping to add some more sometime in the near future. I actually looked at all the oceans in the world, and I've pelagic birded in all of them, which is cool. I hadn't realized that. So, pelagic birding is something I really enjoy. I'm not sure why, but I just find it really interesting to sort of unravel the mystery of these birds that spend so much time at sea, and you rarely get a glimpse at them when they're either close to land nesting, or when you can get on a boat and kind of get in their territory. So whether it's from land or from a boat, it's something, you know, I'd either be out on a boat or be in the middle of the woods. Those would be my top two places to go birding. So and this is just a photo of me from Vardo, Norway, about to get on a boat to go look at pelagic birds. And it's kind of interesting. The poster in behind me talks about a lot of the pelagic species that actually breed in the Arctic, but spend their winters in the ocean where we see them out on the water. So phalaropes and Jaegers and skuas and things like that, that basically breed up at 75 degrees latitude where I was, spend the winters down in our ocean. So it was kind of cool. I went back a few months later and actually saw a lot of these species in breeding plumage on their territory, which was pretty cool. And I'm actually going back there again next month for 2.5 weeks. So that should be good. So what are pelagic birds? So pelagic birds spend their life on the open ocean. Sometimes they can be found on land after getting blown ashore or very close to land, but primarily they only come either onto islands or coastal areas to breed. So things like puffins and razorbills, things like that. So that's the definition of pelagic birds. They usually nest on offshore islands or protected headlands where, predators can't access them. And like this albatross, this is a black-footed albatross from offshore from San Diego last summer. They can be at sea for months or even years before they come back to land. So it's hard to imagine, if you've seen some of the conditions that we get in our oceans, to imagine that these birds spend 9 months of the year just wandering around the ocean and sleeping on the water and, not having any real warmth or comfort, and, are fighting for survival. So it's pretty amazing that they can do that. So there's a bunch of birds that I kind of was wondering myself and didn't really have a good answer. So there's a bunch of species like cormorants and terns and gulls and ducks that we see on the ocean, but they're not, they don't technically meet the criteria for the definition of a pelagic species, but you often see them when you're out doing pelagic trips. And, things like herring gulls, they might breed inland and be at dumps and things like that. But then there's kittiwakes that breed on offshore islands and spend the rest of the year at sea. So even within, families, there's some species that are pelagic and some species that are kind of pelagic, cormorants, great cormorants, for example. So I'm going to talk about some of these because, you'd see them on trips, pelagic trips, but, they're not strictly by the definition, they don't really fit. So, and this is just a pair of common terns having a discussion somewhere offshore of Jador, actually. I think I photographed these when I was coming back from the brown pelican that was out that way a few years ago. Okay. Any questions about what pelagic birds are before I get into the next section? There's going to be a quiz at the end, so make sure you're clear. All right. So where do I find pelagic birds? This might seem like an obvious answer, but you can see them from land, from on headlands and beaches, typically where you've got a good view of the ocean. Onshore winds really help. So if you've got a tropical storm or a hurricane or a nor'easter, or really any kind of good winds from the water onto land, that can bring birds in. And for me, my go-to spot is Peggy's Cove, which is picture of the lighthouse in the fog. So as long as the seeing is good, then that's usually where I'll be. And stay off the black rocks, and if there's swells or high tide, stay away. So it's always first things to be safe, and then look for birds after that. So no tick is worth your life. So I guess that applies to insects as well. So make sure you do tick checks too. Sorry. Let's see. Where do I find pelagic birds? So from the water, whale watching boats is a good opportunity because you're out where the birds are. Can be a little bit frustrating because sometimes you can see birds flying in the distance, but you can't get to them because you're stuck watching a floating log beside the boat. So I've kind of given up on that option myself, but I still find myself going because I like getting out on the water. There's a number of pelagic tour operators that run bird tours and run whaling tours. So Peggy's Cove Boat Tours, who I've been kind of associated with for a number of years. They take people out to Pearl Island on a daily basis through the summer. Mariner Cruises, they do whale watching trips, and then I also charter a trip with them. Danelle does Bird Island puffin tours in Cape Breton. I haven't personally been on. Pleasant Bay whale watching. There's There's a guy out of Lunenburg that does tours. I forget his name. Lunenburg whale watching, I believe. And then, you know, if you know anybody with a boat, I've I've exchanged, you know, favors for people that I know that have boats to get out onto the water. I've borrowed a boat. I've, you know, taken a friend's kayak out on the water. So, you know, I scrounge and scrape to get out whenever I can. So, I even know some people that have gone out on commercial fishing boats, that they know that to get out and see some birds. So obviously that's a little tricky because you don't want to get in the way of guys trying to make a living, but if you have the opportunity, it can be good. We'll go through some tips for photographing and viewing pelagic birds. So like anything, you know, planning and preparation help you to be successful. So, you know, you can't expect to go down to the ocean or go out on a boat on any given day and see things. So you need to kind of know where to go and what to look for. So, you know, for me, a hat and sunscreen are important because I turn red like a lobster in the sun. Some people like to get anti-nausea pills or a patch, depending on how rough it is, or whether you're in a swell or if you're across the swell. It can be lots of motion, you know, water and food. You're out for a long time. Binoculars, life vest, or some sort of life preserver, camera protection. I've lost a camera to salt spray, and it's very easy to do because salt water is very corrosive and very damaging to anything electronic. So, you know, it's good to have some protection, like a camera cover if there's spray or if there's rough water. You know, I tend to take a lot of shots when I'm out on the water. You miss a lot, so extra batteries are always good to have with you, and a field guide or an app to help you identify things that you might not know right off. You know, app is a little bit more convenient than busting out a book out on a boat, but I've seen it done. So, you know, and I guess the other thing is just to make sure that the boat that you're on has all the required safety equipment. So here, Life Raft, they have all the life jackets on board. They give a safety briefing, you know, a life ring. So the sea can be a very dangerous place, even though it may not look like it at first blush when you go out. Just bad things can happen. So it's always good to make sure that the appropriate safety gear is on board. And if it isn't, you know, again, it's not worth your life if something bad happens. You know, with seabirds, well, with birding in general, weather is a huge thing. So, you know, if you need to be kind of mindful of the sea conditions, the fog, the wind, the water temperature. All these things have a big role to play in terms of where the birds are. You know, generally the birds are going to follow the food. So if the water conditions and the waves and the fog impact your ability to see them, so does their food supply. So if there's no food around, there's likely not going to be any birds. So, you know, manage your expectations. So, you know, plan to have your trip canceled. So have alternate plans. Don't, you know, stay a couple extra days in case your trip gets canceled. You know, these are things that you should expect to happen and be prepared for. So, you know, if you stake everything on one day and are leaving the next, you may not get to go out. So, you know, always have a plan B. Find onshore winds are best for land-based viewing. So if you can't get out to the boat, then the next best thing is for the wind to bring the birds to you. So for me on the South Shore, it's southwesterly wind. That's really what helps. Also in the fall, a northerly wind can be good to, you know, bring the birds from that are breeding up north, you know, like gannets and such, on days with a northeasterly wind. Did I get that right? No, northwesterly wind, I guess. No, I got that wrong. Anyway, I can never get that right. It's like left hand, right hand. Anyway, so yeah, you want to just get, you know, winds that are pushing the birds in the right direction. Again, migration time can make for good sea watching. I remember one day the winds were from the northeast, and I was at Chebucto Head, and I had 6 or 7 parasitic Jaegers fly by within a few hundred meters of shore. And it was pretty exciting to watch. So with that tailwind, the birds really take advantage of that when they're migrating. So again, dress for the elements and protect your gear and stay safe. A lot of these places where you sea watch, you're on a cliff or you're, have a bit of a tricky trail to get to the place where you're watching. So just make sure you've got good footwear and you're staying back from the edge and all that good stuff. Viewing, if you're from land, a spotting scope can work. You wouldn't believe the number of times I've been asked if people can bring a spotting scope on a boat. And, I don't think that, from a space perspective, it really works, nor would you be able to really see anything, just given how much the boat's moving. So, or even a tripod. So, if you're on land, a spotting scope can be great. I like 10x42 binoculars because you get a little bit more magnification. I've even seen 10x50s or even higher magnification for people that are really keen sea watchers. In my experience, I've found that looking at the ocean charts can be really helpful because birds tend to concentrate where there might be food. So if you've got a bunch of deep water without any structure, there could be birds there, but generally speaking, at least in my experience, when you've got shallower water with deep water, you get those upwellings that brings food or things to the surface, and that's where the birds are going to be. So knowing what's around you in terms of under the water can help you figure out where the birds are likely to be. You've got generally 180 degrees of ocean to scan, so knowing where the birds might be concentrated can help you find them easier. Multiple observers can help spot birds. So, if you're out with a couple or 3 people, you can be scanning different areas of the horizon, be using the clock system. So straight off the shore would be midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Using that kind of system can help people get onto the birds quicker. And in a lot of cases, if you're getting just a brief glance of a bird, a photo can really help nail an ID if you couldn't quite get it through the binoculars. And again, this is a puffin going by with some fish, in case anybody was wondering. So photography, I think, one of the attractions for me about pelagic birding is that just the difficult conditions. The birds are moving, the boat's moving, the water's moving, you've got spray, you've got fog. The light can be weird because, the orientation of the boat relative to the light. There's just all kinds of variables that you don't have to deal with on land. So, when you nail that shot at sea, it's that much more satisfying because it's that tricky to do. So, so for me, I typically like to shoot wide open because you get the most light that your lens will allow, or even one stop down to get a little bit more sharpness or a little bit more depth of field. Some of these birds can move around quite a bit, so the bigger the slice of space that you have in focus, the better. I typically use 1/2000th of a second or higher shutter just to freeze the motion. So again, with so many things moving, use this as fast a shutter speed as you can afford without your ISO going too high. So I'd sooner have a sharp shot with a little bit of noise that I can deal with than a motion blur shot that I can't fix. So I tend to use auto ISO on my camera with exposure compensation. So you get changing light, you get a bird against the sky or a bird against the water. You don't want to be messing with adjusting your ISO on every shot. So I set my aperture, I set my shutter speed, and I let my ISO float. Those are the three legs of the exposure triangle. So that way I don't have to really worry about it. If for some reason something is staying still and is close, I can mess with the ISO if I need to, or just add a stop or take a stop away of exposure compensation without taking my eye off the viewfinder. And that works well for me. One of the things I see people struggle with a lot is if you're using like a bridge camera, is that you're actually trying to zoom and focus at the same time, and that's really tricky for both the user and for the camera. So generally the birds are going to be at a pretty good distance. So my recommendation to people is to set your camera to a focal length that's going to give you, the bird in a good size of the frame, and just leave it, and then just focus on tracking the bird and trying to get the right shutter speed. If you try to zoom in or zoom out on the bird, chances are you're going to miss the shot. So again, what I like to do is, look at the birds that are a little bit further away that might be coming towards the boat or coming towards land, and shoot them when they get into range. That way you can kind of track them from a distance. If you look off to your side and you see the bird, by the time you swing over to it and try and get it into focus, you've already missed the shot. So those are really low probability shots. So I try to focus on the ones that I can get a bead on and track them for a bit of time. And then, my success rate is a lot higher. For birds onto the water, when you get close to them, they'll typically take off away from you. Or if you have an experienced boat operator, you can approach them into the wind so that they'll take off towards you, because birds, just like planes, they get extra lift when they fly into the wind. So you can use that to your advantage in terms of being positioned to get them taking off when they do decide to lift off. And then this photo here is a Leach's storm petrel, which is the ones that we have breeding here in Nova Scotia on like Bon Portage and places like that. And I think, basically all my advice would have been applied here. So using a 500 millimeter lens, probably 2,000ths of a second shutter speed. And we'll get into some of the ID tips here, but you can notice the sort of the V-shaped white rump as well as the notched tail, and the long sort of wings here as compared to the Wilson storm petrel, which looks quite similar. So and then, don't forget land birds. So I think pretty much every trip that I've been on out on a boat, there's been at least one songbird, or even raptors, passerines, hummingbirds can be seen at sea, especially on the Bay of Fundy. Birds coming through New Brunswick have to cross the Bay of Fundy. So while they're doing so, you can see them. I think I've had Canada warblers, hummingbirds, sparrows on different boat trips that I've been on. So it's always useful to kind of keep an eye out for the structures on the top of the boat, the towers and things like that. The birds will tend to land on those. The lights can sometimes even attract them. So just keep an eye out for birds that you might not expect to see out in the water. And we are interested in birds, but there's all kinds of other cool stuff out on the water. So you can see whales, you can see otters if you're out on the West Coast, sea turtles, sunfish, flying fish, tuna. I've seen all kinds of stuff, dolphins. So it's really interesting. It's an interesting environment to be in. There's all kinds of wildlife out there. So I find generally where the birds are feeding, there's usually other animals as well. So you've got dolphins and whales and things feeding from the bottom, which is pushing the fish up to the surface, and then the birds are feeding on them from above. So typically when you're out on a boat and you have control over where the boat's going, if you're seeing like gannets diving, it makes sense to head in that direction, because generally that's where their food is. So there's going to be Jaegers potentially coming in to chase the gannets or the gulls, or there might be other things. Right. Any questions before I jump into the different types of birds that we see here in Nova Scotia? Oh, okay. So first off, we'll talk about identification. So, I always tell people to get a good field guide or an app, and sort of do a little bit of studying in terms of what birds you're likely to see in your region. The first thing, I typically tell people, just like trees, start off being able to tell a maple from an oak, or a guillemot from a puffin, or a guillemot from a shearwater even. And that's, that gets you a good ways to the ID, is being able to pick out the genus or even the family of birds. So The tricky thing is some birds we see in breeding plumage, other birds we see in non-breeding plumage. We see mature birds, we see immature birds, we see different color morphs of birds. So there's all kinds of different varieties of things, and a lot of times pelagics, you're seeing birds at a great distance, and you know, with a lot of spray in the air or fog, so you don't always get a good look at it. So just like anything, you know, the best way to get good at it is to practice and practice some more. So that experience really helps in terms of being able to pick things out without a long look. And like I said, getting a photo can be really helpful. So here's a couple of examples of some non-breeding birds. A puffin in sort of mid to late August with a couple of phalaropes, red-necked phalaropes, I believe. So here, you know, the puffin doesn't look much like what it does look like in breeding season. Its face is all black. It doesn't have quite the same colorful bill as it usually does. So some birds can look quite similar in non-breeding plumage. I will share this link out. I found actually in the course of preparing for this presentation. It's like a sort of a quick reference guide for seabirds in Atlantic Canada, put out by the government. So it's got the different shearwater species. We'll talk about some of these ID tips. Fulmar is actually one that I forgot to add to my presentation. The Jaegers, the Skua, gannets, phalaropes, the black wing tip gulls, white wing gulls. So this is a pretty good reference for any people that are doing pelagic birding. So and it even has the Newfoundland and Labrador common names. So if you look here at myrrh, which is interesting that they don't have this listed as tur, because I think it's common myrrh that they call turs in Newfoundland. Oh no, they have it here. Thick-billed myrrh is tur. Okay, interesting. Right. Well, there you go. I learned something new today too. Okay. So we'll get back to it. So alcids are probably one of the more common groups of species that we see. So these are typically, you know, black and white birds, puffins, razorbills, murres, both common and thick-billed, black guillemots, dovekies. I see they're generally black and white with a little bit of color on the beak and the feet. They generally stay low to the water, move fast, and you know, offshore islands. They definitely get much more plain in non-breeding plumage. As I showed back here, this bird here, this is a black guillemot in breeding plumage, and this bird here is also a black guillemot, but in non-breeding plumage. So they can look quite a bit plain, more plain in the winter, and can be a little bit trickier to tell apart. But again, with practice, that comes. Shearwaters. Shearwaters are, as their name suggests, they're named because they typically fly close to the water, and even as they're banking, they'll dip the tips of their wings into the water, and they'll slice the water as they're flying. So that's kind of where the name comes from. So the four species that we commonly get close to shore are great shearwater, probably the most common, Cories, Manx, and Sooty. And I think probably the Manx is the least common, but depending on where you are, they can be some. But I think in order of appearance, it would probably be great, Sooty, Cories, and then Manx. And then other species are possible, like Audubon's shearwater, or what's the Cories relative one? Scopoli's shearwater. You know, depending on what part of the world you're in, there's different kinds, but those four are the ones we typically get here. And you can see all four of these from land, depending on where you are. So they typically will sort of fly with very stiff wing beats close to the water. And every so often they'll kind of wheel up into the air like this one did, where they'll kind of do like a semicircular, flight, where they'll kind of come up bank and then go back down. Just as they're flying with the wind. So these guys can cover a lot of ground in a hurry. So big long wings, they can really move. So but they're also often found in rafts of a group of birds just sitting on the water, digesting. So here's a bit of a composite of a few different species. So these guys are really long-winged, and they're also part of the family, or also part of the group of birds called tube noses. So as you can see here, they drink seawater and they expel the brackish part of the water out through their nose. So storm petrels and shearwaters have this structure on their nose to be able to consume seawater and then sort of get rid of the salt. So here we've got Cories. This is a sooty. This is a Manx, and this is a great shearwater. And you can see here it's tipping its wing into the water as it's flying. Okay, so gannets and boobies. These guys are fun. They don't breed here, but we do see them in migration, and we will get vagrant brown boobies. So typically we'll see the immatures in the summertime when we're out whale watching, or birding, pelagic birding. We'll see the immatures, and then a little bit later in the season we'll start to see the adults passing through. And really anytime we can see brown boobies, vagrant brown boobies. So here's one. I think this was in October when I had one when I was sea watching down at Peggy's Cove. So these guys breed in the southern hemisphere and then wander all over. So I'd say they're a regular vagrant. I think we see a handful of these a year on fishing boats or from shore or out on the boats. So and these guys are the ones that you'll see diving, like they tuck their wings back and they look like a missile diving into the water. So they're pretty unique. The one thing that I was taught that's really useful in the summer when you see them is the piano keys. So the trailing edge of their wings, or the secondaries, are typically alternating black and white when they're at an immature state. So that can be a helpful key, but generally just the flight pattern and the size is they're pretty easy to identify when you do see them. And yeah, so storm petrels. So we get two here in Nova Scotia commonly. So the top one is a Leach's storm petrel, and the bottom is a Wilson storm petrel. The Leach's breed here, and the Wilsons breed elsewhere and come here for their winter, our summer. So on the top, you can see the Leaches. They've got longer wings. They've got the V-shaped white rump and tail, and they generally have a more easy flight style. On the Wilsons, they sort of flap a little bit harder. And as you can see, the line across the tail is straight, and this little bit sticking out is their feet. So when they're flying, they look pretty dissimilar. So they're, if you can get a good look at them, they're pretty easy to pick apart. They both do this sort of dancing on the water. So they kind of bob. If they're not just flying from one place to another, they do this kind of bobbing motion as they kind of looks like they're dancing on the surface as they're picking up little bits of seaweed or little bits of fish that they're eating. Jaegers, so these guys are at least my personal favorite seabirds. So they're kleptoparasitic, so they will chase other birds to steal their food. Generally, they have some different color morphs, and they have some different age characteristics that can make them a little bit tricky to identify. And generally, at least in my experience, long-tailed Jaegers are usually only ever seen from boats, but I have seen them from land. I saw one last fall at Bayswater Beach, actually blown ashore from the hurricane. But that was the only one that I've ever seen from land. The other two, the Pomerine, which is this one here, the big one, they're big bulky birds that have a longer beak and thicker wings. And then there's the parasitic Jaeger, which is a more slim winged species with the 2 points on the tail. So they all have these white wing flashes. And so the amount of white and then the number of primary feathers that have white on them are sort of the keys to identify them. The parasitic Jaeger is also sometimes called Arctic skua. in more so in Europe than here. But if you ask, say, parasitic Jaeger in Europe, people look at you kind of funny, like, what is that? So when I'm over there, I have to adjust. Skuas. This is my other favorite kind of bird. So these are a large aggressive seabird that are also a kleptoparasitic, or they steal food from other birds. So the top one here is a South Polar skua, who one year were out on Briar and basically flew right up the back of the boat. So we got up close and personal with this big guy. And coming soon is a great skua. I have not seen one yet anywhere in the world, and I'm hoping this is the year that I see one. They look basically similar in structure to a great skua, but they're more cinnamon colored than the sort of the cooler colors of a South Polar skua. Same behavior, similar size, but just more look like they have the frosted tips in their feathers with that kind of blonde mixed in with the brown. So yeah, coming soon to a pelagic near you. Terns. So this is one of those kind of pelagic birds, where some, like common terns, can breed inland and then spend the winter out on the ocean, or Arctic terns, which typically can breed on the mainland, but then spend the winter offshore. Roseate tern, same thing. And then there's a bunch of other ones that we sometimes see during storms, like Forster's terns, Royal tern, Caspian tern. Black terns breed in marshes, but then move south along the ocean. So you can see those out on the water as well. Then there's a bunch of other, like bridal terns and sooty terns, that breed down in the Caribbean, but then spend time out on the ocean. And there's pelagic trips out on the Gulf Stream, for example, that you can go see those species out on the ocean. So, and in hurricanes, they typically get blown up this direction as well. So phalaropes. So phalaropes are really striking in breeding plumage. This is a red-necked phalarope that I took a photo of from Norway last year when I was up there. So when we see them, they look kind of just pretty much like white and gray and black. There can be huge flocks of these, 5,000-10,000 birds out in the water. It's kind of like being at the Guzzle, if you've ever gone and seen the shorebird flocks there, but they're out on the ocean, just massive hordes of them. So again, the top one here is a red-necked phalarope, and the bottom one is a red phalarope. And this was I always had trouble picking these two birds apart. And I think the thing that sealed it for me was the back. The rednecks will have a streaked back, multicolored, and the reds will mostly be gray on the back. So that's at least sort of the ID key that I've used to kind of help me separate the two. When I'm seeing them in mixed flocks, you can pick them apart just by the streaking on their back. So, okay. So that pretty much takes me to the end. That went a little quicker than I thought it would. We got some time for questions or discussion or what have you. I've got my contacts information here. If you want to look at some of my photography or reach out to me via my website, you can do that.
Have you got any trips planned yet? I mean, like group pelagics. Sometimes you organize them with a group of birders. Any planned?
Yep. So I'll be doing every Saturday in July and the first Saturday in August with Peggy's Cove Boat Tours. So a birder focused trip with them. I've got a Briar Island trip in September 20th organized, but I haven't sent out any info on it. And I haven't decided about a Lunenburg trip yet. We haven't had very good success the last couple of years, so I'm kind of on the fence. Maybe do it earlier. The last couple of years we've done it in August, and it's been kind of late. We've missed the birds by a few weeks, so they've moved off to different places with the water warming up and the food moving. So based on intel from the captain, I might, if I get the urge to get out in July, I'll send out a note to folks. So
Some great little ID tips in there for the difference between some of them. The fallow oaks are always difficult to figure out which are which on the ocean when they're in we'll call it the less bright colours. I like that streak back for the redneck. That's great.
Jason, would you be able to put the link for that document there that you had with the ID features for all the pelagic birds? Could you put the link in the chat?
yep, just one sec.
Oh, or do it that way.
Oh, I just gotta do it this way.
I took a photo of the screen actually for that one, so I've got it.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I'll just copy link and then chat. Where's the chat?
Should be on the bottom.
Chat. There we go. There you go.
Thank you.
Eric's got his hand up as well.
Yeah, indeed. Just a comment. I enjoyed the presentation, and I certainly enjoyed the photographs too, Jason. It's nice to see a survey of that kind, which covers the waterfront, so to speak. I wanted to mention that there's a really, really good book on seabirds and seabird biology, and it seems to be rather little known, but I think extremely highly of it. And let's see if I can put this on my video. There it is. Anyway, the book is called Far From Land, and it's by a man named Michael Brook, who's a seabird biologist at the University of Cambridge. It's not an academic book, really, but it's a wonderful, wonderful survey of the biology of seabirds, published in 2018. I think just about every day something new on seabird biology comes out, and that's due largely to the use of GPS satellite links to little transceivers on the birds themselves, all kinds of electronic tricks that are used to let us know what seabirds are doing. Anyway, Michael Brook describes all of this in great detail, and he's extremely well written and very, very engaging. So I strongly recommend this book for anyone who's interested in seabirds, as I am and have been for decades, many decades, in fact.
Mhm.
So I will just mention the book, Michael Brook. It's 2018, so it's not as out of date as it might sound, because most of the electronic technology that's put into tracking seabirds has been in the last 15 years or so. And so this was 2/3 of the way through that pretty much. And sure, there's lots more, but the basic stuff hasn't changed a lot. So I recommend it. And it's if you want some good bedtime reading, that is definitely it.
Great. Yeah, and I gotta say, Eric, a lot of the stuff I know about pelagic birds I've learned from you. So habits and climate and oceanography, and so you've been a great resource for me personally. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jason.
If anybody down in the southwest is looking for a good location for land-based bird watching or pelagic watching, there are now 2 new viewing platforms down on Cape Forshire at the lighthouse. One's completely accessible to everybody, and they give you great views out of the ocean, and well worth checking out.
I have a question. It's Patricia here. Is there any benefit to the shearwaters when they use their wings to cut the water?
No, not that I know of. Maybe they just do it because they can and it's cool, but I don't know. I don't think there's any advantage. I think it's just a thing that they do. Uh,
Show off.
they can turn pretty tightly and they're pretty nimble. So it's one of those things. It's you got it, flaunt it, right? So.
Right.
I bet it's the
Maybe.
nature of how they fly, because they fly so close to the water that they dip their wings in it because of that. And I know the albatrosses use, I can't remember what it's called, but they can actually generate energy and lift by going into the waves and into the wind, and continuously soar without flapping at all.
Yeah, there's definitely updrafts on the waves and stuff. So flying low, there's definitely an advantage to flying low. Just the wing
the
tip
term is-
dipping might just be a function of that. So
Yeah, I think it's called surface effect, where if they get some lift when they're very low to the water. I seem to remember.
And you will notice if they are flying toward the wind, they aren't flying directly into it. They're always going across it. So it's a zigzag pattern, and they're taking advantage of the lift that they get on the downside of each wave. And they're down in the boundary layer, which is where friction is beginning to affect the velocity of the air. So it's a little bit lower, but they're still getting lift by doing this zigzag pattern into the wind.
yep, it's amazing how they've evolved those techniques and to basically expend so little energy and cover such great distances.
And one thing I might just mention that is kind of interesting that I learned from Michael Brook, and that I knew by observation that shearwaters dived, and they do dive. Great shearwaters do it, and sooties do it. But the deepest dive that I've heard of by a sooty shearwater is 70 meters, which is really quite considerable. And this is based on electronic logging of the depth they were at. Most might go down at most 10 meters or so foraging for food. But something like an emperor penguin, which is a very large, of course, and very powerful penguin, which I guess qualifies as a seabird pretty well, they've been logged at 400 meters, which is truly astonishing.
Yep, for sure.
Any other questions for Jason? Any camera questions at all for the man?
Information about the status and prevalence of avian flu among the pelagics. I know for a fact that the gannet colony in Cape St. Mary's, Newfoundland was hit pretty hard. I think Kyle D'Entremont had mentioned to me that something in the order of 60% of the birds were affected last year. I know that some of the seabird trips, like cruises down to Antarctica, they weren't allowed to debark onto the islands. And if they were having to bleach their boots and bleach their gear between trips and things to prevent any unwanted spread. So the great skuas have been hit pretty hard as well in the Shetlands and things like that. So I know it has impacted a lot of the European colonies and even some of them over here. So I haven't heard anything recent in terms of how it might affect them this year, but it's generally when they're on land that they're concentrated and more at risk.
Yeah, I wanted to mention in that regard that I keep track of seabirds in Lunenburg Harbor through most of the winter, and I've been doing that for a few years now. And this is the first year that I've seen no black guillemots, virtually. One or two, but that's about it. So my guess is that they've been affected by avian flu, and we may not know that. At least we may not know whether the population is down or not until we can get back out to Pearl Island, Jason, and see what the black guillemot population looks like there. I'm willing to bet that it's been decimated by avian flu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was only out twice last year, and I didn't really notice. If anything, the opposite. I noticed the puffin numbers were up from previous years. Razorbills seemed to be pretty steady. Guillemots seemed to be pretty steady. The kittiwakes were quite low though, so they may have been impacted by the avian flu,
Yeah, we're
or they're
seeing
just
far
being
few
driven.
guillemots this year.
Where's your favourite place to go pelagic watching in the world, though, Jason? Not
Well, I mean, I've only been out to sea I've been out to sea in Australia and New Zealand, but not really far. So I think New Zealand was pretty cool, and there's lots of good opportunities there. South Africa was pretty good, but I didn't get out really far there either. Um, you know, the trip that I did out of San Diego was pretty cool. There was some neat stuff, but getting to see an albatross up close was pretty cool. So I think if I wanted, or if I had to go anywhere, I've had my eye on I think it's called Petrel Station out of New Zealand, where they do a 2 or 3 day trip, and they go east into I think it's the Humboldt Current, if I get that right. If I ever get down to New Zealand again for work, I'll be definitely going on that trip. I think it's the Cape Hatteras tours that friend Ray has been on several times. Goes out to the Gulf Stream off North Carolina and sees like black-capped petrels and sooty and bridled terns, and gets some good birds there as well. So that's on my list if I if I get down that way. So. But I think my go-to is Peggy's Cove. It's 20 minutes from home, and I've seen all kinds of stuff there just from spending gobs of time. So if it's a stormy day and the conditions are right, I'm going there. So
yeah, it's a great spot.
as I was looking back through my photos to try and find photos for the presentation, I was actually quite surprised how many seabird species I've seen from there that really nobody else has, because probably nobody else is silly enough to sit there on the rocks during storms like I do. So
Sometimes you find amazing inland species too. I remember a trip that I was planning on coming to or hoping to come to, and then it just didn't fit. And you guys found a western meadowlark out there. I couldn't believe it.
yeah, that was it. That was November of 2021, I think it was. Yeah, and I think actually Susan Holmes might have found that bird before I did. Um, I think you were there that day, Susan, I think, and might have actually recorded it. I didn't know that you had found it or had seen it, but then I found it as well. So I think our eBird reports weren't very far apart. But anyway, that was a good one.
Sarah, we can reverse that in a sense. The very first long-tailed Jaeger I saw was in a farmer's plowed field in the Gaspereau, not very far from where you live. It was one that Bernard Forsyth had found, and it stayed around for 2 or 3 days, feeding on earthworms and on the mice that Bernard took out to it by crawling out on his belly through the farmer's plowed field. And then one morning, Ian McLaren and somebody else, maybe Blake Maybank and I were there, and the bird just looked around and sort of looked at the sky and took off and flew off toward Minas Basin, and that was the end of it. But anyway, inland, it was great.
Yeah, I've never, or at least in my short time birding, there hasn't been any on land record of Jaegers here. But seeing them when I was up in Norway last year, seeing them basically sitting on the shoulder of the road was something else. Just like junk birds. They were, every time you got out of your vehicle, they were there, and even dive bombing you to get you off of the places where they had their nests. So that was pretty cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that again.
Pretty special. Anybody else got any questions for Jason at all? No eclipse questions? You've seen the photographs of the eclipse he took, they were amazing.
Thank you. I will tell you one funny, or not funny, but really interesting, or what I found really interesting birding story about the eclipse. Probably about halfway through the eclipse, there was a turkey vulture and a young bald eagle flying over. We were on the banks of the Miramichi River in Doketown, and it was a sunny day, and it was fairly warm, so there were some updrafts and things like that. So the birds were soaring, but in the time that it took from the sun to start getting covered to the time that it just before it got dark, those birds had to work progressively harder to stay in the air, because the temperature dropped and the updrafts stopped, and these birds were working like you hardly ever see turkey vultures flap their wings. Well, both the eagle and the turkey vulture were really working hard to the point where they just landed in the trees, kind of not because they wanted to, but they needed to. And then it got dark, and then about probably 20-30 minutes after the totality, they lifted off again and started working their way back up into the air. So that was a really strong cue of how the weather changed that drastically in such a short time and affected the birds. So there was something that I had seen. I think the Cornell folks had done a bunch of recordings of bird sounds before, during, and after the eclipse. If you look online, I listened to some of them when I was preparing to go watch it, and it's pretty dramatic. The birds start singing their night songs, and they quiet down, and then they start singing their morning songs within a few minutes because the light's changing the other way. So it's pretty interesting event to witness firsthand.
Fascinating. Well, there's no more questions. I'd like to thank you, Jason. A very interesting presentation. And I certainly look forward to getting back out on the water again soon and checking out some pelagic birds. It's going to be great. So thanks, everybody. Do appreciate it. And have a good evening, and let's get burning.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care,
See ya.
everybody.
Bye-bye.